Carolyn Amendola, and welcome to History in the Kitchen. I am so glad that you are joining me today. My power just came back on, so I'm glad that I could even get this done. So I've been really looking forward to talking about World War II rationing and making today's maple custard pie. If you so choose, I would love it if you would follow my blog, teachinghistoryherway.com, or you can follow my page on Facebook, Teaching History Her Way. You can follow me on Twitter, Teaching History Her Way, or on YouTube, Teaching History Her Way. And on YouTube, you can find some back episodes of History in the Kitchen. Or you can follow me on Instagram, Teaching History Her Way. So there's kind of a pattern going on there. I really hope that you should choose to follow me. That would be great. If you wanted to share this video while I'm cooking so that other people can watch along with you, that would be super too. So today I decided to go with a Rosie the Riveter theme. You may remember Rosie the Riveter as a part of World War II propaganda to show women and to encourage women to enter the workforce when men in World War II left to go fight overseas. So Rosie the Riveter was based very loosely on a woman named Rosie Monroe, but there were lots and lots of different Rosies because there were lots of different women who joined the workforce. And you have to remember that Rosies came in every size, shape, color, sexual orientation. There were lots of different Rosie. So Rosie the Riveter in the Norman Rockwell painting had a red and white polka dot headscarf. I went with the headband because I don't know how to tie a headscarf. She wore a denim shirt, and she also, which is something that I don't have, wore a Westinghouse pin. I tried like all my might, and I sent my mom on this little scavenger hunt too. My grandma worked for Westinghouse Electric, and she left behind one of those pins with her picture on it. She left behind her badge, and I really wanted to wear it today, but alas, we can't find it in any of her stuff. So we'll keep looking, and I'll show you another time. So welcome. I'm glad that you could be with me to cook today when we talk about World War II and World War II rationing, and I'm really excited to make this maple custard pie. I did it in test kitchen yesterday, and it smells wonderful, and it tastes even better. It is absolutely delicious. So I'm glad that you could join me today. The sources I used for today's information for today's episode are from the National Women's History Museum, the National World War II Museum, and the National Park Service, just so you know where I'm getting my information from. So December 7th, 1941, a day which shall live in infamy forever, brought the United States into World War II. World War II actually started in Europe in 1939 with Hitler's invasion of Poland, and then 2 days later, France and England declared war on Germany. But December 7th, 1941 was the bombing of Pearl Harbor, and that's what brought the United States into World War II. Americans were previously split on entering the war. Americans wanted to remain neutral. Some Americans didn't want anything to do with it, but the bombing of Pearl Harbor brought American public opinion to wanting to join the war. The war changed the entire world, and we still feel the effects of World War II today. But not only did it change the entire world, it also changed what people were doing here in the United States on what we call the home front, or home, the US, for us. The war demanded basic supplies, and among those supplies were foods like meat, dairy, coffee, cheeses, fruits, jams, jellies, breads, lard, shortening, oil. It demanded shoes. It demanded nylon. It demanded silk. The war demanded metal. The war demanded automobiles, gasoline, fuel oil, firewood, coal. The war demanded paper and rubber and tires. So there were a lot of things that were necessary in order for the United States to mobilize our war effort. And civilians also still needed all of those items for consumer goods. So we have this push for demand by the US military for all of these things that consumers also need, and now they're kind of fighting for resources. But the United States, Americans united for the common good in order to help our soldiers overseas fight the war, fight the good fight. So rationing became the norm for the United States. The first executive order that had to do with rationing that was signed by FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the president at the time of World War II, was Executive Order 8875, and it created the Office of Price Administration. And that executive order, which is not a law. So let's just clarify that here. Executive orders are not laws. They technically have no teeth. So when a president signs an executive order, it's not coming from Congress. But Congress felt that this was such an important thing. Rationing and conserving food and different supplies was so important that they signed the Office of Price Administration into law on January 30th, 1942, and food rationing began in spring of 1942. The Office of Price Administration also put a ceiling on the prices of certain products so that people couldn't price gouge. So the whole idea of this was to prevent hoarding, which we've kind of seen lately with toilet paper. I think that has since stopped, or at least I hope. We saw hoarding with hand sanitizer earlier in the pandemic. We saw hoarding with bleach wipes and all kinds of cleaning products earlier in the pandemic, because as people learned that these things were missing, people would buy as much as they could to conserve it. The same thing happened with rationing. When the Office of Price Administration said, or word got out that certain products were going to be rationed, or certain products were going to become less available, people would go out and buy as much of it as they could. So human nature really hasn't changed, but the Office of Price Administration was the federal government's way of trying to stop these things from happening. Furthermore, certain stores would also not sell more than a certain amount of product to a person, even if they had what they called ration stamps, which we'll talk about in a moment. So rationing was Americans' way of contributing to the war effort. So if you were here at home, if you were unable to fight, if you were a child, if you weren't eligible for the Army, then or any of the armed services, rationing was your way of helping out. That made you patriotic. Now, there's a big difference between patriotism and nationalism. Nationalism is the super bad one. That's where you think that you are the best country and your country is awesome and they can't do anything bad ever. And we know that all countries do bad stuff, the United States included. So nationalism isn't the thing that we were pushing in World War II. Patriotism is the thing that we were pushing in World War II, where you're proud of your country, you're proud for your country, and you want to help your country. And patriotism can take many, many forms. And one of these things was rationing during World War II. So the Office of Price Administration set limits on purchasing certain high demand items, and the government would give points to people, and the government gave points to all people. Men, women, children, babies even got ration points. And those ration points had to be turned in along with money to purchase goods that were restricted items. So let's take an example here. A pound of bacon. Okay, I want to go to the store in 1943 and buy a pound of bacon. Yummy, yummy, delicious. And bacon is, ready? 30 cents a pound in 1943. 30 cents. I go to the store and I pay like $6.99. So 30 cents a pound. I can't get that bacon from the store unless I have 30 cents and my ration points. And they look like little stamps, little coupons. And both of those things need to be turned in before I can get what I need. Ration points came in stamp booklets starting in May of 1942. And I think I have a little picture of that to show you. So here's, sorry for the mirroring. This is what ration stamps looked like, and they came in a book, okay? And volunteers handed out the books and explained the system. The rationing system was pretty confusing. I saw a statistic that like over 50% of people didn't understand how it worked or what it did. There were 5,600 rationing boards nationally by the end of the war, and 100,000 civilian volunteers who helped to explain and pass out these books. So that's a pretty big chunk of people. The ration books had red points and blue points, and you'll also see if you look in pictures at archives, there are other colors as well. Red points in the beginning were for meat, fish, and dairy, and each person got 64 points a month. Blue points were for canned and bottled foods. People tried to conserve canned and bottled foods and any kind of factory-made food for the soldiers to send those overseas. So that's why those were rationed. And you got 48 points a month for those. Now, interestingly enough, sugar is one of the longest and first items to have been rationed during World War II. And you were allowed 2 pounds of sugar per month. I have to figure out a way to make this turn around. Okay, so you got 2 pounds of sugar per month. And in thinking about that, let's think about a 5-pound bag of sugar. It's pretty big. For those of us who don't bake a whole lot, it might last a long time, but for those of us who do, fine. Or if you like to put sugar in your coffee, coffee was also rationed. Let me tell you a little about that in a minute. You are not going to, 2 pounds of sugar is not going to last you very long. You have to really stretch it out. So Americans during World War II had to contain their sweet tooth because they couldn't get the sugar that they needed to make those baked goods. And as far as coffee is concerned, if you run on coffee in the morning, you would have been drinking something at some point called Roosevelt coffee, which was reused coffee grounds. Ew, gross. All right, so before we talk a little bit more about rationing, let's start cooking our recipe for maple custard pie. I have one that's gonna magically come out. This takes 45 minutes in your oven to bake. So you're going to preheat your oven to 350 while we're putting these ingredients together. And when it's time for you to take the pie out, and I'll repeat this again later, you're not gonna want your custard to crack. And usually these types of pies crack because they're either overcooked or they cooled off too quickly. So when you're ready to take your pie out of the oven, what you're going to do is you're going to just shut the oven off, leave the door open to the oven, and let it cool off that way, okay? All right, so you are going to start out with 4 large eggs. And if you are using a stand mixer, I am not using a stand mixer, 4 large eggs. You are going to want the whisk attachment for your stand mixer. I'm going to whisk it by hand. And my arm got a little tired yesterday while I was doing that. All right, so let's crack our eggs. Let's put them in a nice bowl, which maybe you can see. There we go. It's better. And remember, I always have my garbage bowl waiting over here for any of the garbage that I have. So garbage bowl is a good thing. We like garbage bowl. All right, 3 and 4. All right, we're gonna leave the eggs in there for a second. And I was doing some reading and I found out that a room temperature egg actually gets fluffy faster. Did not know that. I knew that newer eggs got fluffy faster. I didn't know it about room temperature eggs. So we're gonna hold on to these cracked eggs for just a second, and we are going to also scald our milk. Scalding our milk is better for a custard. If you can't scald your milk, or you're not in a position near a stove to be able to do that, you can still make it with cold milk. That's fine. You need 2 cups of milk, and in order to scald milk, really all it is heating it up. You just wait for a little steam to come up on the top. So I'll show that to you as best I can. But let's pour 2 cups of milk. And we'll light the stove. I'm gonna scald mine. And I'm gonna let it scald while I'm whisking my eggs. Okay. All right. If the power was still out, I was prepared to light that with a match for you, just so you know. All right, so we're gonna whisk our eggs, and we're going to whisk the eggs until they are fluffy. So you're gonna hear some sounds from me and the bowl while I'm talking to you a little bit more about World War II. Okay, and I will show you my fluffy eggs when I'm done. This is gonna take about 2 to 3 minutes of very fast whisking. And you are whisking the yolk and the white. You want the whole egg for our custard. All right, so the war also placed additional demands on agriculture because not only were we feeding our US troops, but we also were part of something called the Lend-Lease program, which started in March of 1941, where the United States promised to supply the United Kingdom, free France, so part of France had been taken over by Hitler, so not that part of France, so free France, the United Kingdom, the Soviet Union, and China with supplies for the war. We promised them through the Lend-Lease program that we would give them munitions, but also we would give them food and oil and other materials. So we were basically supplying the whole world, the Allied powers, for the war. Because if you remember, the war started in earnest in 1949. So these additional demands on agriculture, along with men who were farmers leaving for war, many farmers were excused from fighting. They didn't become a part of any sort of draft because they were so necessary here on the home front to produce food. But they lost their workers, so women were encouraged to join into the agricultural industry. So we had something called the Women's Land Army, and through the Emergency Farm Labor Program, women were encouraged to fill farm labor shortages. Over 2.5 million women joined the Women's Land Army, and I can show you a poster really quickly. This is from the National Archives. So this is a poster for the Women's Land Army. Check out those overalls. That would have been a good costume for today. In addition, many Americans were encouraged to grow their own gardens called victory gardens. So at the beginning of the pandemic, my family and I planted a garden because we figured we'd be able to can our own food. It's also kind of therapeutic too. And this is my bounty from my victory garden. This was yesterday's haul. Cucumbers, jalapenos, kale in there, lots of tomatoes. And those victory gardens were to grow produce for families and communities to offset food rations. So if you didn't have enough food stamps or food coupons, rationing coupons, you would have stuff to supplement with your garden. It was also meant to add vitamins to your diet and to support the war effort. It was presented as something patriotic to do. And by 1943, there were 20 million victory gardens. How cool is that? All right, so by now you should have some fluffy eggs. My milk's not scalded yet though, so I'm just gonna keep going. Your eggs should be pretty bubbly. Hopefully you can see that. Okay. And if you're just joining me, thank you so much for coming in. Thank you for watching today. If you wanna share this video as I'm cooking so people can join in, that would be great. Or if you wanna follow my page so that you know when next week's is, that would be awesome too. School is starting up again, so we're going to move history in the kitchen to Saturdays. Okay. All right. So the USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture, also had some extension services. These were particularly made in agricultural areas to teach about food use and conservation. The extension services actually started during the Great Depression, but people saw the writing on the wall that there were going to be food shortages again, so the USDA extended those extension services into World War II. All right. Basically, what the USDA did was they had home demonstrations of how to can products and how to preserve different foods, and they also opened community canning centers. They didn't make pressure cookers very much because the materials were rationed, so the community would provide pressure cookers for people to can. I think that's really, really neat. All right, my milk is getting there. I'm not sure if you can see it from here, but there is steam coming up from my milk. There's a little bit of bubbling, so now I'm going to turn my milk off. My milk is scalded. Just to the point where you get a little bit of steam from your milk is where you want to go with that. Okay. Women were actually encouraged to can foods from their victory gardens. They linked these activities, they linked victory gardens, canning, etc., to soldier activities. All right, so next thing that we need to do is we need to, now that our eggs are frothy, nice frothy eggs, okay, we need to gradually beat in the milk. So here we go. So that just means really, really slowly pour it in. I'm actually going to switch hands here because it's easier for me to whisk with my right hand than with my left. So I'm very slowly going to pour this in, and I'm beating it the whole time. Make sure you're using your whisk the entire time. Do not stop until all of that milk is in. You'll also notice that there might be, from scalding your milk, a little bit of milk stuck to the bottom of the pan. That's fine. Do not scrape it because then that will make your custard chewy and chunky and disgusting. We don't want that. Okay. So now that our milk is in, the next thing that we need to put in here is the maple syrup. Now the maple syrup is going to change the color of your pie depending on what kind of maple syrup you're using. Some maple syrups are super dark. Other maple syrups are a little bit lighter. Mine is a dark color one. So we're going to put in 1 cup of maple syrup. Okay. Don't add too much because then your custard will come out weird. Switch hands again. And gradually put in this maple syrup. Now maple syrup is our replacement for sugar because remember, sugar is rationed. Sugar is going to be one of the very last rationed foods, and it's going to be rationed until 1947, even though the war is technically over in 1945. So the maple syrup is taking the place of the sugar that you would normally put in the custard because this was more readily available. And maple syrup was actually more readily available than even fruits because sometimes the fruits were rationed depending on the time of year and the demand for them. And also jams and jellies occasionally made their way onto ration lists. So if those were being rationed, it was hard to make a fruit pie. If you couldn't get the fruit, you couldn't get the jam, you couldn't get the jelly, but you could get maple syrup. Okay, and then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put in a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. Okay, and we'll whisk that in as well. Okay, so there were 4 billion cans of canned food by 1943 that were self-canned by people on the home front. They freed up the factory, produced canned food for the military, which is super awesome. And I think it's really cool that there were community canning places. So here is here's a picture of 2 women at a home demonstration done by the USDA. And these home demonstrations taught people how to preserve food. And the USDA continued to help people learn how to can food. In fact, you can even go on the USDA's website. They still do that today, which is really cool. So how did people deal with all of this rationing? Well, there was hoarding and there was a black market. Those are the negative things, but here are all the positive things. Here's how they decided to make lemonade out of those lemons. Restaurants had meatless menus on certain days because meat was rationed. And this is kind of gross, but also kind of cool. Gross to us, maybe not gross to them, but people added organ meats to their diet. So the army wasn't sending the hearts or the livers or the brains or tripe or kidney or tongue overseas. So people added those things. So one of the recipes I actually saw was for a brain pudding, and it was made out of animal brains. But I didn't think you'd want to make that, so I didn't pick that as the recipe. Government organizations gave tips to families on how to stretch their ration points and get variety in their meals. Newspapers helped people too. Newspapers often published recipes, and they also helped people keep track of what was being rationed and how many ration points something was. Propaganda posters helped to unify people and make sure that they were rationing and also get their hearts and minds behind being patriotic in this way. And advertisers gave recipes for meatless dinners, like walnut cheese patties and also macaroni and cheese. In fact, Kraft sold that blue box macaroni and cheese. They sold 50 million of them during World War II, which is awesome. And eventually butter is going to join the ration list, so margarine gains popularity. So there were lots of different ways that people got creative in the kitchen. And the United States government's offices and different restaurants and advertisers were willing to help people figure out how to do what they needed to do with less. Sounds like a pretty firm philosophy to me. All right, so we've got our custard filling, and you're probably going to have more custard filling than you have room in your pie plate, and that's okay. I'm using a graham cracker crust. You can use lots of different kinds of crusts. If you were feeling super ambitious and you pre-made a crust before today, you can use that. If you have a refrigerated crust, you can also use a refrigerated crust in your own pie plate. You can also use a frozen crust. That's fine too. If you are using a pie crust with one of these flimsy pie plates, you're going to want to put it on a baking pan. This way it's easier to handle and you're not spilling. So you're going to need your vegetable shortening. The original recipe that I used for this said that you need 1/4 teaspoon of vegetable shortening. I used a 1/2 teaspoon yesterday because I found it was too hard to spread that little bit on the pie plate, so I didn't ration very well. But you're going to spread vegetable shortening onto the bottom of your pie crust. So that's our next step. Not sure if you can see that here. So step 2, or I guess not step 2, step later, is putting this vegetable shortening on the bottom. And hopefully you've washed your hands before you cooked. We always do that. I do it before we start. So we're just gonna take this vegetable shortening and we're gonna spread it along the bottom. Okay. So there are a lot of power outages here because of the tropical storm that we had earlier in the week. We had it on Monday, and most of our local food stores are shut down. I wasn't even sure I was going to be able to cook with you today because I needed to get some extra ingredients. So I'm super glad that we were able to do this together. All right, so now that I have that vegetable shortening on the bottom of my pie plate, I'm going to pour some of this custard in. Now here's the tip. Don't fill the whole thing. Put it in the oven a little bit and then fill the rest. So fill as much as you can without spilling it by accident, and then fill the rest of the pie crust when you get to the oven. Okay. So that's about as much as I can do without spilling. So here's what I've got, and I'm gonna head to the oven. And if you have extra, I put some of the custard filling in a little ramekin that I could bake. This way I could have some extra custard that tastes really good hanging around as a dessert. So custard cups. Okay, so put this here. Oops. I'm gonna put a little bit more filling in. Now, if your bowl doesn't have a spout, then suggestion, put it in something where you can pour. Okay. And I'm gonna let this bake for about 45 minutes. Now, if you're using a frozen pie crust or if you're using a refrigerated pie crust, my suggestion is that you put tin foil around the edges. That tin foil will keep the edges from burning so that you'll have a nice custard in the center and you'll have a nice fluffy and flaky crust on the edges. All right, so in 45 minutes, your pie is going to look something like this. And it's going to taste really, really yummy. I ate a custard cup yesterday, but I did not cut the pie because I wanted to be able to show you. So this little indent right here that you're seeing, this is where I stuck my knife in. When you stick your knife into the pie, the knife should come out clean. That's how you know that your custard is all finished. Now, you can't eat it as soon as it comes out of the oven. You have to cool the pie to room temperature, and then you need to refrigerate it for at least 2 hours before you eat it. So this might be a dinner dessert for you. It's definitely not an afternoon dessert or something that you can eat immediately. And it smells really, 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 really good. So I hope you enjoyed today's History in the Kitchen. I hope that you learned something. I also hope that you took some time to make some observations of the pictures that I showed you. We talked a lot about women today because women's roles were in the kitchen, and the man's role was usually to go out and fight. I do have this picture right here that I didn't show you of the War Rationing Board. This is from the National World War II Museum. And I also want you to notice that the people that I'm showing you that were a part of the war effort were all different shapes, sizes, colors, and ethnicities. Because it takes all of us to be American, and it takes all of us to make American history. So I hope you enjoyed History in the Kitchen today. I know I did. I was looking forward to this episode all week, and I can't wait to see you again next Friday for our last Friday History in the Kitchen. We'll be starting Saturdays after next week. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to drop me a line, charlene@teachinghistoryherway.com, or you can pop something on Facebook. You can send something through my blog, teachinghistoryherway.com. And if you have any suggestions for future Histories in the Kitchen, I would love to have your suggestions. This suggestion came from 2017 Gilder Lehrman Institute of American History's Teacher of the Year, Sarah Zimnick. So I want to thank her so much for encouraging me to do this one. And I hope you all have a really great week, and I hope you enjoy your pie. Have a nice day and a great week, and I'll see you next week at History in the Kitchen.